In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Heavenly Father, we come to you today asking for guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this day's professional development. Fill us with your grace, Lord God, as we learn today for the good of our students and for the service of humanity. We ask this in your name. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We acknowledge that Treaty 6 territory on which we stand is the ancestral land of the Indigenous peoples and is common home to everyone in virtue of God, our Creator's gracious gift. In today's presentation, we'll be doing an overview of the science of reading. We're going to ask teachers to consider how to address the needs of struggling readers in your classrooms, and hopefully you can take some time to make a school-wide plan to address the needs of the specific struggling readers at your school site. We are gathering data so that we can start to identify those students who need supports and interventions, and also begin to investigate further what exactly their needs are. So this is the beginning of a multi-step process, but it is in the interests of being able to direct resources to help students learn to read. We can also use the TOSREC data to celebrate the success of students when it comes to reading and their achievement, and to acknowledge the work that students have done to have their reading be at level, and to acknowledge the work that teachers have done. The TOSREC is a screener, it's not an assessment. It is so early in the year that this is a true diagnostic of a student's reading ability, and that is really all it is diagnosing. The online assessment dashboard could use some tweaking, and I would appreciate any feedback from you to help create the evidence that these tweaks need to happen. What I've heard so far is that the data entry format does not complement the way we have to add up the data in the booklets themselves. And also the levels of proficiency as they're reported in the dashboard may need some adjusting. So please do send me your feedback about that process so that I can make suggestions to improve the whole experience for teachers. Let's talk about reading difficulties. We know that adolescent literacy is critical to the success of students in every subject. All of our curriculums, including English language arts, is predicated on the assumption that students come to our classes knowing how to read already. That success in curriculum is part of, I think, the underlying reason of why we need to be part of a struggling reader's improvement. The phrase, just tell me what to do and I'll do it, is one that I hear commonly from teachers, and why not, right? We're busy, we're stressed out, we're beholden to all sorts of pressures. One thing I just want to acknowledge are those pressures and stresses, but also to say for our students to have a chance at raising their reading abilities and levels, what we need from teachers in this realm is not compliance, but understanding. And that's part of the purpose of this presentation and this whole afternoon and the afternoons to follow, is to create that understanding so that the teacher themselves can become the resource that a student can rely on. Let's talk about the science of reading. The graphic here that you can see in front of you is referring to a collection of evidence, cognitive research, educational research, neuroscience, linguistic research, that all is added up together to demonstrate how children learn to read most effectively. This is the research also that instructs us to screen children early and often to be able to catch any sign of reading failure in order to prevent it. This research has been around for about the last 40 years, and it's from the science of reading that we get the 5 pillars and the points that follow. One thing I'd like you to remember and understand is that reading is not natural. Humans invented reading, and so it really shouldn't be any surprise when some humans have trouble doing it. It isn't a natural skill like walking or talking, and students can't pick it up through observation or osmosis. Instead, it needs to be deliberate instruction and targeted instruction to allow a student to do this unnatural thing. Everyone learns to read the same way. The research has also shown us that there aren't multiple approaches to being able to read. There is a known path or reading circuit in the brains of skilled readers, and this comes from the neuroscience side. Through CT scans, we can see that this is the same part of the brain that is activated when students read. And in fact, those students with dyslexia, for example, will use different parts of their brain to learn to read. Some students will acquire these pathways more easily, and others will need lots of repetition to be able to create them. But the reassuring thing is repetition is doable. The last is that all students benefit from explicit and systematic instruction in those reading skills. Regardless of demographic, background, all students can be instructed to learn to read. And when it comes to teaching reading and curriculum content, the challenge for us as junior high teachers is figuring out how to teach in a way that allows both proficient readers to improve and struggling readers to improve. Those struggling readers have a lot of catching up to do, but it's still worth putting them on the path to begin that catching up.
Hi, my name is Antonio Stavile, and I'm one of the inclusive consultants with Learning Services.
Hi, I'm Chris. I'm the Social Studies Secondary Curriculum Consultant here at Learning Services.
I'm Connor Ensha. I'm one of the secondary math curriculum consultants.
And you're here to rank 4 different foods according to your personal preference. Simple enough?
So we're students in a grade 8 health class.
So these are the foods that you have to rank.
Which one do you want, Connor? Which one do you like?
I like this one.
I love this one. This looks like a great drink.
Possibly this for dessert, guys?
I'm thinking it goes this way.
Nope, that's upside down.
Okay, this way.
No,
that
I think mine is right.
Yours is right.
And for an appetizer?
What is the problem?
We don't speak the language.
They don't speak the language, zero recognition of any symbols.
You can't read that alphabet.
No.
So if you're in the class, right, what would be kind of the step a teacher might take to help the students along?
So for this particular task, I'd have some type of visual that accommodates this, so at least the student can link word they can't say to the picture that they may understand or recognize. And then you do have some similar symbols in here. So I'm assuming if this was like a grade 8 class, you'd probably have some kind of alphabet or letter system or something on the board. So for us, as the Korean speakers, you might have to give us some kind of like front-loaded material saying, hey, like this circle line repeats in a couple of these words. What does that mean? What does that sound?
Okay, I'll give you the visuals.
Okay. Those are chicken wings.
This is this one, and this
mine.
is that one. This one goes there, and that one goes there.
This is spicy rice, what are they called? I love these things.
I got soup.
Yep. I got I got noodles.
Well, I got grilled meat. So now we can do this curricular outcome.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, this is going right at the top.
Right, that's what I...
Okay, I will consent to say that's the top. This is second though, because if you haven't had this is delicious.
Okay.
And then this is ramen. Where do you guys want to put ramen?
I'd say third.
Third? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
The soup goes last.
Not a fan of the tofu soup, huh? All right.
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay, so like you mentioned, that's the curricular outcomes. But the problem is,
We still can't read.
you still
I have no idea.
and also,
We'll never be able to repeat this task with just these.
if I were to say, okay, what's your favorite food then? Name it.
That one.
I just looked at the pictures.
Yeah.
Yeah, like me.
I can't even name what they were. I didn't even know that was tofu, to be honest. It looked like crackers.
And you thought that was chicken wings.
But I think but it's interesting though, because like I think that's a common strategy of like a lot of junior high students who can't read would just be like, I just looked at the pictures. And it's amazing how far you could get by. You could rank. You could hit the curricular outcome just by like not even fully understanding the pictures, but actually just being like, I ranked them. I did the task, right?
So what I added there is like the English version, and this is another, I guess, scaffold to kind of help you along with that.
So I built the English, then the Korean translation, then the pictures. Now I make a word association. So ramyeon is what this says, I'm assuming in Korean.
Yeah.
And then that's the picture. So now I have at least built myself a little bit of a graphic organizer. So if we do this again, that should pop into my head. Assuming I'm a typical learner.
If I saw this again tomorrow, I'd probably have.
Yeah.
I'd still struggle associating that with ramyeon with this.
Totally.
Well, there's symbols that I got to learn first before I even get into that.
Yeah, this did nothing for actual like learning the language.
Well, that's it.
Yeah.
When you have students that are kind of struggling with both, right, outcome and language, there are some things we can do to help them achieve that outcome, but they'll never be able to do it independently if we don't also teach them the reading aspect of it, right?
Right.
Totally. So without the foundation of reading, this just becomes a one-off exercise every single time. So you can get them some curricular mark or curriculum outcome, but you can't actually progress on the development of how they're going to build their foundational reading skills.
Yeah, and then the preparation the teacher has to do to kind of get those supports in place for that one class, that one activity. It's not balanced with the work that the student needs to be doing to learn to read,
Right.
right? Yeah.
I'm hungry.
Yeah, let's go get some Korean food. So as I was saying, even if you don't read for pleasure, you can read well enough to have earned a degree, a postgraduate degree. So it's difficult for us to truly empathize with those students who cannot. But this quote here from Anita Archer is true. There is no comprehension strategy powerful enough to compensate for the fact that you can't read the words. And if the TOSREC does indicate or identify students who are struggling, and then we can, through further screeners or conversations, figure out that the issue is a student truly does not recognize the words in front of them, that's where we begin our intervention. This is the simple view of readings. Goff and Tumner identified that word recognition and language comprehension are what goes into creating reading comprehension. The fact that it's presented as a mathematical equation is no accident. If a student does not have 100% of word recognition or language comprehension, they will not have reading comprehension. If they have 0.5 word recognition, they recognize half of the words they see, and they only know half of the words on the page, they'll only understand a quarter, 0.25 of the text that they are trying to read. And that is a problem, especially when we are teaching such content-specific courses in junior high. In 2001, Hollis and Scarborough expanded on the simple view of reading with the reading rope, or illustrating how complicated the reading process is, but also breaking down word recognition and language comprehension into smaller pieces. But we still do know that even in junior high, we have students who struggle with decoding and phonological awareness, especially those students who are learning English as an additional language. So let's review this old graphic of the simple view of reading, but now with the details from Scarborough's reading rope. On the word recognition side, there are some things that I would like to kind of define in a moment, but I also want to draw your attention to fluency, which works between the two. And this is another important aspect, especially in junior high, when you think about the speed of reading that you might have versus the speed of reading of a student who is in grade 2. You'll see how much fluency is that underlying very important aspect of skilled reading. Some terms that I hope you can kind of take with you as part of your professional development are on the screen there. Morphology is the study of words, and it's literally the act of figuring out what morphology means. Ology meaning study, morph meaning shape. Orthographic mapping is literally how words are put into the brain. Phonological awareness is the ability to recognize and manipulate sounds, the spoken part of language, and this is independent of any meaning. Phonics is the tying of sound to the graphs, the letters that we're familiar with in the English alphabet. And decoding is the ability to correctly sound out and understand the relationship between the letters and the sounds. The TOSREC tells us that students who score below the 25th percentile have some kind of reading difficulty. And they don't tell us what those difficulties are, just that there is a difficulty. So by using the word recognition and reading comprehension framework, we can start to identify what it is that students struggle with exactly. In that red circle are students who have good word recognition and good language comprehension. So these are students who don't have problems. They'll be coded or scored as average to excellent readers because they can do both. If a student has good word recognition but poor language comprehension in that yellow box, means they have adequate decoding skills, but they don't know the language. This is pretty typical of a student who's identified as EAL. In the purple box, we have a student who is good at language comprehension, but poor at decoding, and this would be the opposite. The extreme example of this kind of profile is a dyslexic student. And these students will have a lot of trouble reading independently, and will find that frustrating because they understand it when they speak and they understand it when they listen, but it's the reading that makes no sense. In the green box, we have kind of the garden variety poor reader. They are poor at both word recognition and reading comprehension. As teachers, what we I think have to challenge ourselves to do is to not assume that the difficulty a student has with reading begins and ends only with motivation or memory or laziness or being unable to cope with distraction. Those things are a factor for a student, but those things are also symptoms of a problem that is very likely related to reading. There are so many things that contribute to a student's situation that we have no power over as teachers. Their social and emotional state, their mental health, their demographics. But when it comes to augmenting a student's word recognition or their language comprehension, we do have power over that. And I think that is great. That's therefore where we should focus our energy and to do as much as we can to help support a student. You can see this graphic is an example of the prediction of where students will fall when it comes to their reading ability. And this means that up to 65% of our students in our classrooms need structured literacy. Those students that are on the cusp between the yellow and the green, if we don't help support those students, there is the risk that they will fall behind. And the same thing with the cusp of yellow to red. Without direct and explicit strategies for those students, there is a chance that as the readings get harder, as they get older, their reading level won't improve the way that they would like it to and the way that we need it to for them to understand our content. The most common source of reading awareness is poor phonemic awareness, which might be kind of surprising to say part of why a student can't read is because they don't fully hear what the word is. To illustrate that, I have a little video. Hello, I'm joined today by...
I am Deputy Chief Superintendent Tim Cusack.
And we're going to do a little demonstration of the advanced phonemic awareness that we expect from our students as they go through school. So, welcome.
Thanks, Erin.
So I'll just ask you to say a few words and just kind of see how far you can get. I think you'll be able to get to the end. Okay.
Hoping.
Say candy.
Candy.
Now say candy again, but don't say can.
D.
All right. Say has.
Has.
Now say has again, but don't say huh.
As.
Good. You're doing very well.
Thank
This
you.
is really accelerated.
Okay, thank you.
Say would.
Would.
Now say would, but instead of wa, say g.
Good.
Say duct.
Duct.
Now say duct, but don't say the t.
Duck.
Say pavement.
Pavement.
Now say pavement again, but don't say the v.
Payment.
Good. You can see how this would be hard for a student.
Oh, absolutely.
Just learning to
because
kind of...
cognitively you're thinking, okay, consonant, the sound changes. So, yeah, absolutely.
Do you speak any other languages?
Je parle français.
Ah, très bien. So you can see too how for a student learning an additional language, knowing where those little v's are in the middle of the word will also help when it comes to spelling.
Absolutely.
Say trolley.
Trolley.
Now say trolley, but instead of ah, say ooh.
Truly.
Say smear.
Smear.
Now say smear, but instead of say t.
Steer.
These are getting harder, right?
They are getting considerably harder.
Say barn.
Barn.
Now say barn, but instead of n, say j.
Barge.
Right. And with kids, you do several of these examples in a row. It wouldn't just be a one-off and then you'd move on. You do it for weeks at a time.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. And basically give them that opportunity to have that reinforcement and to understand conceptually what you're asking to do as well. Like I'm going to hear a word, I'm going to be changing some facet of that word, and it will likely have a different sound.
Exactly, and inform a different word. And you probably notice that beginning sounds are a bit easier to switch out than end or middle sounds.
Yes, because again, cognitively, you're thinking about that blend, like usually a consonant blend, and that's going to change, right? So,
and also because you're like older than a student in grade,
couple of years.
than a student in grade 4 to 7, you also have meanings attached to those words already, and you might even be seeing in your mind how those words are spelled, where a student who has less experience with those words just doesn't, not yet.
Yeah, and I think that's just it too. You're touching on the denotation, that dictionary meaning of a word versus the connotation, that emotional connectedness I have to a word. So there may be, when we think of the neuroplasticity of the brain, how I relate to a word. There's memories or triggers, things that evoke. So sometimes it's easier because you have an understanding of those other words.
Exactly. Okay. Say mast.
Mast.
Now say mast, but don't say s.
Mat. See, that was a hard one.
Say eat.
Eat.
Now say eat backwards.
T.
All right, this is going to get dicey from here on out. Say aim.
Aim.
Now say aim backwards.
Mia.
Ah, spelled yes, but out loud. Just the sounds. Aim.
May.
Yeah.
Oh,
right.
I see.
Yes,
Yes.
yeah, I see what you're doing.
So right.
Okay, this will be a tough one. Say stock.
Stock.
Now say stock backwards.
Oh my goodness, I'm trying to visualize now, like I'm in the whiteboard in my mind, which often gets erased. That's my tabula rasa. So stock, S-T-O-C-K, so K-C-O-T-S, COTS?
Yeah. No, this isn't a skill that necessarily you need to have, right?
No, but it's... I think it is, again, it's that process of, the letters and the pattern in which they appear,
Yeah. And how consistently in English those patterns exist.
Right.
All right, two more.
Okay.
Okay, say lazy.
Lazy.
Now say lazy backwards.
Easel.
Yes, great. Okay, and what is your role again? Do you mind saying that again, please?
So I am the deputy superintendent, and
Okay, can you try to say that backwards?
I could try to say that backwards, and I think basically it equates to something in Martian. So
We'll leave
nobody
it for
wants to hear that.
Okay, well, thank you so much for going through that.
Oh, it was my pleasure, and thank you for the opportunity. And reading, we all know the importance of reading. The power of reading and the skills involved with teaching reading, because ultimately that opens doors for better writing and
for everything
in life. So thank you for the work that you're doing, and again, now we are all equipped for reading success.
So this graphic here highlights that advancing phonemic awareness, the different exercises that we were doing before. But these exercises also exist for an intervention situation in junior high. And that book that we were using, the Equipped for Reading Success, is a good resource that has these kind of daily 1-minute exercises to really get the words inside of a student's mouth. I would recommend these things for students who are learning English as well, because that phonemic awareness is a huge part of language acquisition. Here are the 5 pillars. Where those 5 pillars originated was the National Reading Panel in the year 2000. And those 5 things were what was determined to be essential elements of effective reading instruction. The advice of the National Reading Panel was to use systematic and explicit instruction, that to do this in a logical sequence, so beginning with phonemic awareness and then moving from left to right there on the way to comprehension. This explicit instruction means telling students what they need to learn, modeling it, and then doing that over and over and over. And if we stick to these 5 things, we have the highest chance of success. On the subject of comprehension, reading comprehension difficulties are usually explained by one of the following things. So those students who identified as below average or struggling, it's likely one of these 5 issues that we need to address of them. The first and the most, I suppose, fundamental is they have difficulty decoding and they have difficulty with fluency. They take so long to decode the word that by the time they get to the end of the sentence, they forgot where the sentence began. The second is difficulties with spoken language comprehension. The third is inadequate topic or domain knowledge, unfamiliarity with vocabulary, which is similar to that, but not the same, and executive functioning. In that domain of executive functioning, the working memory refers to the brain's capability to store things, either temporarily or to move things from the short-term memory to long-term memory. Planning has to do with a student's ability to recognize what strategy to use and also to recognize when a strategy isn't working. And that is ultimately meant to be automatic, as it is for when we read as adults. And it takes a lot of reflection and instruction for a student to be able to do that. And that self-control, not just to self-control and regulate their bodies, it's also the self-control to be able to identify what information is relevant to them in the moment and what information is irrelevant. And that's difficult for a student. Because it's difficult for a student, we are going to ask you then for the next little while, or as much as you can, to focus on vocabulary, which is that 4th pillar. Core teachers need to teach vocabulary to get students exposed to 8,000 to 12,000 words a year. And I think we did the math with Lisa Boussier, and it's about 8 words a day, 8 new words a day, which is 1 per subject, but that means you need to identify what is that 1 word a day that I'm going to bring up to a student and kind of repeat over and over again. Research shows us that typically a typical student needs about 12 exposures to a word before they know it well enough to kind of contribute to their comprehension. And that's a lot, but as I mentioned before, the nice thing about repetition is that it's easy to do. The last concept I want to introduce today is tiered words. This is the concept that if we can divide words into roughly 3 tiers, we can then allow ourselves to focus on the tier that will make the most immediate difference to a student, which is tier 2. So I'll explain the tiers to you, and also kind of keep in mind that these aren't hard and fast rules. It really has to do with their usage. Which tier a word will go into is determined by the role that that word plays in language. So tier 1 are the most basic words. They are things that we expect students to come to school already knowing, even as young as kindergarten. They're easily understood. They can't really be broken down into smaller pieces because they are the small pieces. I'll jump to tier 3. These are very domain specific words and they have a low frequency of use. So they don't come up in conversation too often unless you're speaking about a certain topic. And I don't just mean like the jargon of like a really specific hobby or medicine. I mean, if you are teaching a science unit to a grade 1 student, in that context, the word butterfly would be a tier 3 word because it isn't a word that necessarily comes up a lot in conversation outside of the context of study. Right. So tier 2 has the words of high utility for literate language users, meaning these are words that will frequently appear in text, but are perhaps not so common in conversation. There are also words that aren't specific to a subject, and that's something that I would like you to think about today as a school staff. What are those words that have multiple uses? For example, the word measure. The word measure means something very different in social studies than music. And again, in CTS, the act of measuring, right? And for a student who is acquiring the language or struggling to decode, they need to have those different contexts acknowledged and explained to them in their subject areas, or else they'll be very confused trying to map the meaning of one version of that word into a context that makes no sense. What we've learned from vocabulary instruction is that all instructional methods produce better word learning than no instruction. So we need to do something if we want students to improve. They're not going to improve their vocabulary on their own. They're not going to improve their vocabulary just by getting older. And so as you move now from this presentation to your subject area things, hopefully that can be kind of in the back of your mind as you listen to the conversation. What are those ways that I can bring subtle things, changes into my classroom to be able to not just help bring the struggling readers along, but to reinforce what the below average or average readers know. So thank you very much. And now we'll move on to part 2, which is the subject specific breakout videos.